On September 8, 1989, the silence of the North Sea was shattered by the crash of a passenger plane, claiming 55 lives in the blink of an eye. At first glance, it appeared to be a tragic accident, but as investigators began collecting the debris, they realized they were dealing with something far beyond a simple crash. Wild rumors began to swirl. Was it the assassination of the Norwegian Prime Minister, a collision with a supersonic fighter jet, or a bomb explosion? But the truth was more terrifying than any of these theories. The clues in this case led investigators from the cold coasts of Norway to secret warehouses in the United States, and finally, to the most secure aircraft in the world, Air Force One, the president's plane. The killer of these 55 people was not a terrorist or a clumsy pilot. The killer was a silent, hidden corruption that had infested the aviation industry like termites. Something that might be hiding right now in the very plane you fly on. Our story begins at Oslo Airport, where 50 employees of the shipping company Wilhelmsen Lines were boarding the aircraft. This wasn't a boring business trip. They had won a lottery to attend the grand naming ceremony of a new ship in Hamburg. Their aircraft was a Convair 580, an old but powerful propeller plane known as the Flying Tank. This plane had a 36-year flight history and had previously belonged to the Air Force. In the cockpit sat two of Norway's finest, Captain Knut Tveiten, 59, and First Officer Finn Petter Berg, 50. They weren't just colleagues, they were close friends who had flown thousands of hours together. Even on the black box, their jokes about the previous night's dinner could be heard. Everything seemed perfect for a 50-minute flight. The sky was clear, the wind was favorable, and the plane had just returned from a major overhaul. At 3:59 p.m., Flight 394 took off. The pilots leveled the plane at 22,000 feet and engaged the autopilot. The passengers unbuckled their seatbelts and began to celebrate, but they had no idea that a small technical glitch in the tail of the plane was about to turn into a catastrophe. The problem started with the electrical generator. One of the plane's two main generators began to fluctuate. Following the standard checklist, Captain Tveiten shut down the faulty generator and turned to the APU for power. The APU, or Auxiliary Power Unit, is a small jet engine installed right at the very end of the plane's tail. When the pilot hit the start button, a buzzing sound echoed through the cabin. The passengers might have thought it was the sound of the engines, but it was the sound of death. Suddenly, the plane began to vibrate. Not a normal turbulence shake, but violent oscillations from left to right. At the same time, outside the aircraft, a Norwegian Air Force F-16 fighter jet passed nearby at high speed. Did the fighter's sonic boom hit the plane? No one knows what happened in these final seconds in the cockpit because everything happened too fast. The plane suddenly rolled to the left, inverted, and dove towards the ocean at a breakneck speed. Air traffic control radars saw Flight 394 losing altitude rapidly, and then it vanished from the screen forever. No mayday call, no cry for help, just absolute silence. When the first ships reached the crash site, they were met with a heartbreaking scene. The plane was pulverized. Pieces of metal and personal belongings floated on the water surface, and there were no survivors. Immediately after the incident, immense media pressure was placed on the investigation team. The first theory was political assassination. Mrs. Gro Harlem Brundtland, the Prime Minister of Norway, had traveled on this exact plane just a few days earlier. Newspapers wrote, "Was the Prime Minister the target? And did the bomb go off late?" This theory gained strength when the lab found traces of explosives on pieces of metal. The country went into shock. Had Norway been hit by a terrorist attack? But when investigators looked closer, their hopes were dashed. The substances found were not remains of war explosives, but contamination from missiles that had previously been fired in that military zone and dissolved in the seawater. There was no bomb. With the bomb theory ruled out, the finger of blame pointed at the Norwegian Air Force and that F-16 fighter jet. Headlines read, "Army fighter shoots down passenger plane." The public was furious. Rumors spread that the fighter jet, by breaking the sound barrier at close range, had shattered the airliner. The airline, Partnair, desperate to avoid bankruptcy, fueled this theory. But investigators turned to classified radar data. They reconstructed the paths of the fighter and the airliner second by second. The result was clear. The F-16 was miles away at the time of the incident, and its altitude was thousands of feet apart from Flight 394. Another dead end. No bomb, no missile, no fighter jet. So what had torn the plane apart?
The key to solving this mystery wasn't in Norway. It was found in neighboring Sweden. Swedish military radars, which were highly sensitive, had recorded the data from that day. When Norwegian investigators, along with Greg Feith, a famous American investigator, looked at this data, they noticed a strange pattern. The plane hadn't just crashed, it had exploded in the sky, but without fire. The radar showed that an unidentified object had separated from the plane before the main fuselage fell, drifting down slowly at a distance. The search team went back to the sea. They had to find that missing piece. After days of searching the cold depths, divers finally found it, the vertical stabilizer and a part of the plane's tail. Examinations showed the tail hadn't broken off on impact with the water. It had been torn off in midair. Investigators saw impact marks on the tail fuselage. It looked as if the tail had been thrashing left and right until it snapped off. Now the question was, why would the tail tear off? The investigation team turned to the 4 bolts that connected the tail to the fuselage. 3 of these bolts were broken. They sent the bolts to a metallurgy lab. Everyone expected the problem to be metal fatigue, but the lab report stunned everyone. The bolts weren't fatigued, they were fake. These bolts had only 60% of the strength of a standard aircraft bolt. In reality, they were ordinary industrial bolts that greedy brokers had machined, heat-treated, and stamped with forged documents to sell as genuine aircraft parts. And now the picture was clear. The APU generator the pilot had turned on had broken mounts and was vibrating. This vibration traveled into the fuselage and matched the natural frequency of the tail, a phenomenon called resonance. If the bolts had been genuine, they would have withstood this vibration. But the bogus bolts were too weak to last. They stretched, sheared, and the tail of the plane separated in the sky. This discovery wasn't just the solution to a single case. It was the start of an earthquake in the aviation industry. Mary Schiavo, the Inspector General of the U.S. Department of Transportation, launched a massive investigation to see how deeply these bogus parts had infiltrated the market. The results were terrifying. 39% of the parts in U.S. repair station inventories were suspected of being unapproved. And where was the peak of the disaster? When investigators checked the warehouses for Air Force One, the President of the United States' own plane, they found bogus parts there too. Even the life of the most powerful man in the world was at risk. Partnair Flight 394 crashed. and 55 innocent people fell victim to the greed of brokers who sold worthless bolts as vital parts for a few dollars more. Today, there are much stricter laws for tracking parts, but this case will always remind us that flight safety can sometimes depend on something as small as a single bolt.
I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Until the next video, have a great day.